It's now been over 24 hours since this launch. Do we know actually what happened here?
Look, it's going to be a process of a few months poring over that data, but a few clear anomalies have arisen, both that was visible and that have looked at the data. During the launch, we saw that of the 33 engines on this rocket, not all of them were on. I think at last count, there was 6 clearly that were not on. And in fact, a few had not even ignited, it appears. Also, a few flamed out. Now, this appears to be potentially some dust that was kicked up at the launch site. Now, in order to essentially put the rocket on the ground, they have this kind of ring system that the rocket sits in. Well, when the flames come in, that actually kicked up a lot of dust and debris, and that was actually why it was poor visibility to some people on the scene. Now, often you actually use trenches to help get the heat and energy away from the rocket as it's taking off to avoid that problem. So not only damaged this rings that the rocket was on the ground, but clearly some of the rocket engines themselves suffered malfunctions. They've also looked at already that the second stage, where the Starship is, as we say, when it's attached to the rocket booster, during the flight and then right before it was supposed to separate, you could actually see that it's changed, and there was actually some visual things happening there. Again, what the source of what it was, they're not quite sure. So clearly a few problems have arisen. Some design probably, some maybe just malfunctioning because there are some improvements in the engineering a bit. So there will obviously be a little bit of work to do in both the structure for it to take off and then the actual sources about what happened. There's a number of systems involved that have already been mentioned. Pinpointing the exact one or ones will definitely take time. But look, they will get there. Obviously, it was a disappointment it didn't go all the way around the world. But it at least took off, and that was excitement for a lot of us. It took off to that 39 kilometers.
Absolutely. So it didn't quite get to how it wanted. But, I mean, has it set back SpaceX's program now? What happens from here on in?
Yeah, look, they were already planning to do a few of these orbital tests. That was always the schedule. The next ones are actually already in development and at different stages of being built. The real question, I think, is how does the long-term plans, how are they affected? Now, obviously, they knew they were going to test it. Not everything was going to work perfectly, including the way the rockets themselves would land. Eventually, these will be reusable. In the first orbits, that was not the plan. How long it takes to test all that and get ready, because there's questions of, well, they will get into orbit, it will work. When is that? Because once they get into orbit, then they can start sending people into orbit. Then once you start sending into people orbit, they're going to start sending people around the moon. That Dear Moon mission, this tourism mission essentially is already scheduled. But things like NASA's Artemis 3, the third NASA moon mission, are actually planning on using Starship to be the source, the landing for the moon missions. That the NASA Orion capsule will go to the moon. The astronauts will actually transfer to Starship and then go down to the surface. So instead of NASA building a lander, they're going to use Starship. So that is scheduled for sometime in 2025. Will that timeline be affected? Obviously, it's still early days, but there is some thinking that maybe some of these may be pushed back or affected because of the clear need for development and testing still in the Starship system.